This here is sample number 4, and it is called the plain seam. So I will show you first what you're going to need, how to prepare, and how to sew. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is we're just going to cut out 2 identical sized pieces of fabric. So, you know, not longer really than like a piece of paper. So you could just use a piece of paper as a template and then just cut the fabric in half to make the pieces equal. Then once you have cut them to be the same size and shape, basically what we want to do is we want to join these pieces of fabric together using a plain seam stitch. So to do that, I'm going to kind of work backwards and show you. But if I want my pieces to look like this, I basically have to sew them together so that they end up connecting somewhat like this. So what I mean is, you can see that I put the pieces together and I sewed a line, and then when I open it up, I end up with 2 flaps where the pieces got, you know, sewn together. And on one side, all you see is just a faint line, and on the other side, you see these 2 flaps. Okay, now that we know that we need to sew these pieces together, we need to kind of like hold the pieces of fabric together somehow. So this is where pins will come in very handy. So you should all have received pins, and you're going to pull a pin out, and basically what I want to tell you is when we pin stuff together, most of the time, if we're sewing in this direction, then you want the pin perpendicular, not parallel. So I'm holding the pieces of my fabric together, and I put the pin in just a little bit, and then I kind of leverage it and push it back through. So it should do something like this, and now you can see that it's holding the fabric pieces together. So again, my stitching is going to come this way, and it's going to be way easier if the pin is facing this way for me to pull it out. The other piece of advice is you need to think about whether you are left or right-handed. If you are right-handed, then you are going to be making sure that the pin is on the right side. So you need to identify, where am I going to start sewing, where am I going to finish sewing, and in which direction is that sewing. In this case, I'm starting at the top here, going to the bottom, and I'm going vertically down this piece of fabric. So perpendicular, I'm going to put my pin in here on the right side because I'm right-handed. And this is where I will easily pull the pins out as I'm sewing. So always think about that before you start putting pins in. And you only need to really, in this case, do a pin every, I don't know, 1.5 inches. You really shouldn't need like too many. There might be other cases where we use more, and there might be other cases where we use less, but this is a pretty good amount. So then you will finish pinning, and then we will talk about seam allowance. Okay, once we have finished pinning, then we need to mark our seam allowance. So seam allowance basically means how big are we allowed to make the seam. So in this class, we're mostly going to default to 1/2 inch for the seam allowance. What that means is that this seam here is 1/2 inch wide. So, just to show you, yep, 1/2 inch wide. So I highly recommend that you use a pencil. In this case, I'm just going to do a pen so you can see this easier. Now this fabric I'm using is kind of not straight, so I'll get this as accurate as I can. You can do dots, you could take your pencil and just draw the whole line, whatever suits you best. Okay, so I'll finish doing that and then we'll go to the sewing machine. Okay, so when we are ready to sew this, you're gonna first make sure your machine is on. And then we're going to use the markings on the plate as well as the line that you drew. So as you can see from the middle point where the sewing needle sews to the edge of this fabric, it ends up matching up with this line between 3/8 and 5/8. So if you're ever needing to sew and you don't want to make pencil marks, eventually you can start using just the markings on the plate. But for now, we already drew pencil line. So you're going to lower the foot, make sure that your needle's down, manually insert the needle to make sure that it's going to be going right on the line. Have your pin box here and ready, either on the right side if you're right-handed or left side if you're left-handed. Your machine should be default 2.4 stitch length, and you're going to start sewing. And of course, don't forget to backstitch at the beginning so that the thread doesn't come loose. Tip number 1, always pull out a pin before you sew over it. The pin could shoot out and it could go anywhere. It could go at somebody else, it could go into your eye. 2, it could break this needle. And it's very costly to keep replacing these machine needles. So, start sewing, backstitch a little bit. Now I'm coming up to a needle, pull out, there we go. Please take your time. Guide fabric, kind of hold a little bit of tension here. And don't forget to backstitch at the end. Lift the needle up. Have your trimming scissors, or there's a little cutter on the side of the machine. And now, voila! The fabric has been sewn together. The last step is you are going to take your thumbnail and just kind of press this open. And once you've pressed it open, you're going to take this to the iron, and you are going to iron open this fold on the inside. And that is how you do a plain seam.